I want to talk to you about why we might be held back so much. What's the reason that holds us back when we seem to be one of the most important regions in the entire world? In fact, you hear people say the Permian Basin is critically important. The Permian Basin is strategic. And whether we're talking about Midland or whether we're talking about Odessa or New Mexico or the entire region, we hear things that tell us how important we are. But sometimes if you have children, you know how this goes. You tell your children how talented they are. You try to encourage them in the things that they're good at, and it takes a while for them to believe it. And that means they have to have a paradigm shift. So what I want to talk to you about this morning is the necessity of a paradigm shift here in the Permian Basin. And I'll give you a few definitions of paradigms to begin with. Let me start off with just sort of how I got there. It was years ago, it was about 1990, 1991. Some of you probably weren't even born back in 1990 or 1991. Some of you turned 50 back then, but that's another conversation. But somebody gave me a box that had a planner in it that was called a Franklin Covey planner. I don't know if anybody's ever seen one of those or heard of one of those or still uses one. I still use one, still write things down, don't use my phone for that kind of stuff. And in it was a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In my life, it's become probably the most second important book in my life next to the Bible. And I've spent tons of time in it. And then as you go through that book, you begin to see some definitions from Stephen Covey about paradigms. And that's what I want to do first, is really define this paradigm issue and then define what I call a Permian paradigm and then talk about how we might combat this. Because my conviction is, if we don't have a paradigm shift in the way we think about ourselves, in the way we think about the region, then we're never going to become a world-class city like we've been hearing. We're never going to be world famous above ground like we are below ground. Before I get to the first definition, I just want to remind you personally, corporately, and regionally that paradigm shifts are dangerous. They're very dangerous because they will cause you to do things you may not want to do. They will force you to do things you may have never dreamt of. They will force you to press into impossibility. So when you listen to the subject of a paradigm shift, don't just think of it as some easy change of mind. It's a change of life. It's a change of trajectory. It's literally a life-changing event. But as you start with Stephen Covey and you go through his book, 7 Habits, very first thing he talks about is a paradigm and a paradigm change. And if you'd like, you might start thinking about the word mindset and not just paradigm. If you don't like the word paradigm, use mindset. If you don't like mindset, use paradigm. If you don't like either one of those words, I don't have an answer for you. So I'm just going to keep going. But let's look at Covey's definition of a paradigm, okay? An inherited or learned mental map of the way things are and the way things should be. We'll just leave that slide up there and look at the very beginning of that. Something that's inherited or something that's learned, and it creates a course or a map that you think is the way you should do life. Before I get to the next definition of that and keep moving forward, I was sharing with the group last night that if you're married, remember the first 3 months of marriage when all your paradigms were shattered? You remember you realized that you had to change your paradigm about how you squeeze the toothpaste? Remember that discussion? Do you remember how you had arguments about how you load the dishwasher because there's a correct way to load the dishwasher, and how you fold the laundry? I know you're acting like you didn't have those discussions, but you know you did. And you're like, we still never have, and it's 20 years later and it's still causing problems because paradigm shifts are painful and they're handed down to us. And I'm telling you, we've had a paradigm handed down to us. Doesn't mean the experiences of the past weren't real. It just means the future is changing and we have to be willing to let go of those experiences of the past. An inherited or learned map. Let's go to this next one. And this author you may not have heard of, Viktor Frankl. Maybe you have heard of him. He's a Holocaust survivor. Lost family members in the Holocaust. And he also wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He doesn't use the word paradigm, but listen to what he says. Man does not simply exist, but always decides. Man, that's a key word. Always decides. And before you make an excuse for the lack of paradigm shift in your life, as harsh as this might sound, let me remind you, we're the ones that have to make that decision. We're the ones that decide. Nobody decides for us. Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what he will become the very next moment. Now let me give you another sort of long-form definition of a paradigm, and I've just sort of written this over time. We shape our world by how we perceive our world. Another word for perception is wisdom or gathered knowledge. And we shape the world around us by how we think and perceive our world. And we have the power to change our perception, which means you have the power to change your actions. And thereby, let's change the word world to the Permian Basin. Let me give you one final example of the power of a paradigm. And then I want to move to a little bit about kind of the reality of our new paradigm, although I won't give you much information because you're going to hear so much from other speakers. And then I want to I'll end this by telling you two things that are holding us back and one thing that we all must do. But let's just finish this discussion of the power of a paradigm. You might remember the name Roger Bannister. Anybody ever heard that name? I can't see you. I'm assuming some of you have. But he was I'll call him a runner. Some of us like to say we're runners, but we're really joggers or plodders or something like that. You know, I'm going for a run, but it doesn't look like running to people. But anyways, Roger Bannister was a runner. And in May of 1954, let's just say May 5th of 1954, no one had run a mile in less than how many minutes? 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Nobody had been able to run a mile. As a matter of fact, scientists, if you do a little Wikipedia study, you'll find out that scientists said it was impossible, and they even had a set of parameters of environmental things that had to happen for you to even have possibly a chance, and they still said it was impossible. Well, you know the story. May 6, 1954, Roger Bannister, in less than perfect conditions, turns in a mile in 3:59. Now here's the crazy thing, and I'm sure most of you know this, but it always surprises me. You know what happened less than a week later? Someone else broke the 4-minute mile. And you know what's happened ever since then? People just keep breaking it and keep breaking it. Yesterday, I got online like all of you did, probably about 42 times yesterday, and I just did a little search to see the fastest marathon. Fastest marathon to date is 2 hours and 1 minute. Like I can't walk anywhere for 2 hours. How could I run somewhere for 2 hours, nonetheless 26 minutes, 26 miles? Listen to the pace. 4 minutes and 38 seconds a mile. The paradigm used to be, nobody can do this. But one man said, I think I'll believe differently. And he went out and did it. Now, before I talk about our city, you do realize, and I used to say this in my previous career in the church biz, if there's going to be anything that happens corporately and socially, it begins individually. And so before you go out and expect your elected leaders to be different in the way they're thinking and leading, you be different in the way you're thinking and leading in your life. It's a paradigm shift. But the paradigm has changed around here. Let me show you an old Permian paradigm, okay? And this is a pretty long quote, but years ago I wrote this out and I've sort of edited it a few ways. Remember what Covey said, a learned or inherited way of thinking? Remember that? The bust-to-boom life cycle and mentality is a historical way of thinking, think about the basin, a historical way of thinking that facilitates a narrow-minded and reactionary paradigm that abdicates disciplined thought, action, vision, and progress personally and communally. Just leave it up there for a minute and just think about that for just a minute. How many times in the last 3 years have you heard people say, well, you know eventually this is going to end? You know eventually the bottom's going to fall out of this thing. And even though we no longer hear the issue of if there is oil underneath us, we know that's happening. We know the industry is changing. The world is changing. We keep getting hit with facts. Ray Perryman told us several months ago or just a month or so ago, when we were at the Priority Midland kickoff event, and he told us back in 2008 how the Permian Basin was producing a little under 800,000 barrels a day, and now we're over 4 million. And they used to say 2025, now they say 2023, we'll probably be pumping over 6 million barrels of oil a day. And by the way, if you want a Green New Deal, let me tell you something. You know it takes 40 barrels of oil to even put up a windmill? You can't do anything without the Permian Basin. You can't change the world without the Permian Basin. But we have inherited a reactionary paradigm. This mentality allows us to blame one set of circumstances for one set of actions and another set of circumstances for a lack of action. In other words, you and I have inherited a paradigm that says this is what we get and this is what will happen, therefore we won't. But once you accept a new paradigm, it requires a new goal, and those are dangerous. Because I would say our biggest problem is not that we want the best education system. You know, how are we going to get there? Our biggest problem is not healthcare or infrastructure or workforce development. We just don't believe we're the ones that can make it world class. We don't believe we can compete against the Metroplex. We don't believe we can compete against Austin. We don't believe we can compete against Manhattan. In fact, sitting here, some of you are thinking as you hear me, that's kind of stupid. Why? 4 minutes was stupid. We're the ones that decide. We're the ones that have to tell people who gave us this place, we're going to take it even further. Paradigms are dangerous, but they can also move you into something even greater. Let me move to 2 things that can hinder us, and then I'll tell you one thing that's going to be required of each one of us. The one thing that will hinder us is trust. Trust is a big issue. It's a huge issue. In fact, my good friend Dr. Kathy Cook says that the question, who can I trust, is the most important question we ask in our lives. And in our lives and in our community, have we been let down by one another? Yes, absolutely you have. All of us have been let down by people. Have we been let down by an elected official of the past? Answer, yes. Have we been encouraged by an elected official? Yes. Have we let ourselves down? Yes. Have our companies let us down? Yes. Has your spouse let you down? Yes. They still squeeze the toothpaste from the middle. Whatever the case might be. But you know what we have to do? What we have to do is be willing to get up every morning and choose to trust. We have to choose to trust that for the last 5 years, people haven't been lying to us about this industry has changed and this world has changed, and we have to take advantage of it. No one's trying to trick you into this. We have to trust one another. We have to trust the mayor and the city council and the school board. We have to trust people in the hospital, working in the hospital and medical care, people running companies. We got to stop running around saying, oh, eventually they're going to leave because they're going to get what they got. It requires trust. Is trust hard? Answer, yes. It's a paradigm. And many of us have a paradigm that says, I won't trust people, and I won't trust organizations, and I certainly won't believe for a great future. We have to choose to trust. You know, the 75 people sitting in this room, it starts with the 10 around you. But I think the other hindrance is something that you may not have thought of before. Certainly we could fail. One of our hindrances might be failure, but here's what I think is the greatest hindrance, success. Because to succeed in becoming a world-class city and region means you have to have believed you deserved that, and you could do that. Not long ago, a friend of mine came to my office. He was considering a new career. Brilliant man, about my age, and I'd worked with him on some other issues, and he had a real mathematical mind, real analytical mind. One of those math people, you know, that would come to class and say, when you were in high school and say, oh, I didn't study for the test, I think I'm going to flunk, and then what would they get at the end of the day? They get an A, and you're like, I don't like you. And so that was the kind of person this was, but I liked him. And he came to my office, and he said, I'm thinking about changing careers. And so we started this discussion, and I said, what's holding you back? He said, well, you know, I was raised in a very, very poor family. And right now, and I won't tell you what his job was at the time. He wasn't making a very good salary. And this is what he said. He said, I am starting to believe that my calling in life is to be poor. And he wasn't joking. And he said, I'm supposed to just maybe lead my family to know what it is to be simple and poor. I looked right at him. And I said, no, I don't think that's your calling. I said, I think your fear is that you're afraid you could actually succeed. And you're not sure you could change your paradigm to accept the new you. And I'm not sure we're willing to have to stop saying to people, there's nothing to do in Midland. What if that changed? I don't think we're ready to accept the fact that this might stop being a tour of duty and it might be a destination to arrive at and stay at. You never know. We may change our paradigm so much, we might have permanent water features. Could you imagine that happening? But when you change a paradigm, when Roger Bannister said, no, I'm going to do this, did he have to start training differently? Did he have to start living differently? Did he have to do everything differently to bust a paradigm? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, the Permian Basin of the past got us here, but it will not take us there. And we must change our paradigm and teach people how to change a paradigm, because you cannot become world-class until you believe you're world-class before you see it. Now, what's the biggest challenge? Here's the biggest challenge. It's really simple. This small group has to be the group that decides when they walk out these doors, my conversations change. The way I act when I'm in public, even though half of the restaurant is closed, changes. The way I'm nice to people changes. The way I look at traffic changes. You know, when you go to Dallas, you never complain about traffic. You can just accept it. Here, you sit through a stoplight twice. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? You know what? It's becoming world class. It's becoming world class. I know your house might be expensive, but what would you want? For it to be worth nothing? I know that it's hard to find a doctor, but that's what it means to grow. I know that education is a struggle, but you know what? It's not going to change in a day. We have inherited a decades old paradigm that has brought us where we are. Busts and booms have been real. Cycles will be real. But only a people can decide in their hearts to see a vision no one else can see. So we can change a paradigm that changes our actions, that we give to our grandchildren a place they could have never hoped or imagined, because we chose a new paradigm. Thank you.